The crowd gasped when the young bride refused to kiss her wealthy husband at the altar. Cameras flashed, whispers erupted, but no one knew the truth, that she had been sold to this man by her own parents. And what she was about to do next would shake the entire city of Lagos. Lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in a crowded, noisy neighborhood. Her life wasn't extraordinary. Working as a waitress in a local cafe, she spent her days serving coffee and pastries to wealthy businessmen, tech moguls, and tourists who passed through the city, their lives seemingly perfect, while hers remained in a constant struggle for survival. Ngozi had always dreamed of something bigger, of escaping the cycle of poverty, of walking into a world where money wasn't a constant worry and where opportunities didn't feel like a distant dream. But dreams often have a price, and Ngozi was about to pay it. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting a golden glow across the busy streets of Lagos, a man walked into the cafe. His name was Chief Olamide. He was in his late 60s. Tall, well-dressed in a dark, tailored suit that seemed to radiate wealth, and his presence was as imposing as the skyscrapers that dotted the city's skyline. He was known across the city for his vast empire, hotels, businesses, and investments that spanned continents. But beyond his wealth, Chief Olamide was also known for something else. His reputation for ruthlessness. He took a seat at the corner table, and Ngozi couldn't help but notice him. He was one of those men who seemed larger than life, like he belonged to a different world. She tried not to stare as she took his order, but it was impossible not to. There was something about him, something dangerous. As she brought his coffee to his table, their eyes met, and he smiled, a smile that seemed far too knowing. It sent a chill down her spine, but she couldn't understand why. Perhaps it was the way he looked at her, with eyes that seemed to see beyond her, beyond the waitress in a cafe, beyond the poor girl from the slums of Lagos. After that encounter, things began to change. Chief Olamide became a regular customer, always sitting at the same corner table, always ordering the same coffee, and always watching Ngozi with those piercing eyes. His gaze lingered a little too long, and there were whispers that began to follow him wherever he went. Some said he had an eye for beauty, others that he wanted something more than just a good cup of coffee. A week later, Ngozi's life would change forever. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening. The cafe was nearly empty when Ngozi received a phone call. Her mother's voice was frantic on the other end. "Ngozi, listen to me carefully. Chief Olamide wants to meet with you. He has an offer for you, an offer you can't refuse." Ngozi froze. The mention of Olamide's name sent waves of fear and confusion through her. What did he want from her? Her mind raced as she tried to process the words her mother was saying. "He wants to marry you, Ngozi," her mother continued. "He'll take care of everything, your family, your debts, your future. This is the only chance we have." Ngozi's heart sank. Marriage? To a man who was old enough to be her grandfather? It was a thought that sent shivers down her spine, but her family was drowning in debt. Her father had lost his job years ago, and her mother was struggling to keep things together. The weight of their financial burden had been heavy on Ngozi's shoulders for as long as she could remember. Her mother's voice grew desperate. "Think about the family, Ngozi. Think about your brothers and sisters. We can't survive like this. He'll give us everything we need." Ngozi stood in silence for a long time, the weight of her mother's words pressing down on her. She knew what was being asked of her. Marry a man she didn't love, a man she barely knew, and her family would be set for life. It seemed like the only way out of the dark hole they were stuck in. But was it worth it? Could she trade her dignity, her freedom, and her future for security? In the end, The choice wasn't really hers. The next day, Ngozi found herself sitting across from Chief Olamide in a lavish restaurant, a world away from the cramped cafe she worked in. His smile was as warm as it was unsettling as he spoke. "You're a beautiful woman, Ngozi," he said, his voice smooth and rich with power. "I've been watching you for a while. I see potential in you, in your beauty, in your strength. I want you to be my wife, and in return, I will give you everything. Wealth, power, influence. You'll never have to worry again." He laid it all out. The luxurious mansion in the city's richest neighborhood, private jets, expensive clothes, and vacations. A life of luxury beyond her wildest dreams. But it came at a price. "You'll marry me, and you'll never have to work again. But in return, I want you to be loyal to me. You'll be mine, and only mine." The proposition was straightforward. A marriage for wealth, for security, and for status. But something about it made her stomach turn. This wasn't love. It was a transaction, a deal made with no regard for her happiness or desires. Ngozi knew she had no choice. Her family's survival depended on her. The decision had been made. Ngozi sat in her small, dimly lit apartment that night, the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. The small space felt even smaller now, suffocating her. She had never imagined that her life would take such a turn. Not like this. Not in the way that felt like a betrayal to everything she had ever dreamed of. Marrying Chief Olamide was not a choice. It was a necessity. And as her mind raced with the possible outcomes, she found it difficult to see anything but the fear of being trapped in a gilded cage. The next morning, Ngozi's family gathered in their modest living room. Her parents, eager to see the bright future ahead, beamed with excitement. But when they looked at Ngozi, they saw only uncertainty, the shadow of a choice that hung over her like an anchor. Yet, there was no turning back now. She had already agreed to the marriage. Ngozi's mother embraced her tightly, wiping away the tears that she hadn't even realized had fallen. "This is for the best, Ngozi. You'll see. Your life will be better, and we'll be able to breathe again." Her father, who had been silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "You're doing this for the family, my daughter," he said with a heavy voice. "You have the strength to carry us. You will make us proud." And so, the arrangements were made quickly. Chief Olamide's lawyers met with her family to finalize the terms, and before she knew it, a lavish wedding was being planned. A spectacle that would mark the union of a wealthy businessman and a beautiful young woman. But Ngozi felt like a piece of property being exchanged rather than a woman about to marry for love. As the wedding day approached, Ngozi's emotions ranged from fear to anger, but she kept her face calm, as she had been taught to do. In her heart, she kept asking herself, what happened to the girl who wanted to dream? On the morning of the wedding, Ngozi was awakened by her mother's gentle hand on her shoulder. The golden rays of the sun had barely touched the earth, but the preparations were already underway. Ngozi, now dressed in an extravagant bridal gown that felt too heavy for her, stared into the mirror, her reflection unfamiliar. The woman staring back at her was not the woman she once was. She had become someone else. A wife, yes, but also a prisoner of her own circumstances. As the bridal procession marched toward the grand church, the opulence of everything around her almost overwhelmed her. The guests were all high society elites, their faces painted with excitement at the spectacle they were about to witness. Ngozi could feel their eyes on her, sizing her up, evaluating her as though she was part of a show, not the woman at the heart of it. Chief Olamide stood at the altar waiting for her. He was dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, his face expressionless, cold. His eyes didn't meet hers as she walked toward him. Instead, he looked straight ahead as though this was simply another business transaction to him. The crowd whispered, admiring the beauty of the bride. But Ngozi's heart sank further with every step she took, knowing she was walking into a life of chains, one she had no escape from. Once the vows were exchanged and the rings were placed on her finger, the ceremony came to a close. The applause was deafening, but in the silence that followed, Ngozi's thoughts were her only company. That evening, after the wedding reception, she found herself in the penthouse suite of a luxurious hotel overlooking the sprawling city of Lagos. Chief Olamide was beside her, his presence overwhelming in a room full of expensive furniture and shimmering chandeliers, but she felt empty. "You're finally mine, Ngozi," he said, his voice low and calm, as if nothing had changed. His words sent a cold shiver through her. She wasn't ready for this, none of it. The weight of his gaze on her made her skin crawl. The night dragged on, and soon she found herself alone, standing at the window, looking out at the lights of the city. She could see the whole city beneath her, a world she no longer belonged to, a world that had been taken from her. As the hours passed, Chief Olamide returned to his suite, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She was supposed to be the queen of this life, living in luxury, but all she felt was an overwhelming sense of loss. Her heart longed for the freedom she had traded away, the chance to live her own life. It wasn't long before she realized that this life was not what she had imagined. Her husband's coldness only grew with each passing day, and though she had everything she could ever want in terms of material wealth, she had nothing that mattered. She didn't have love, she didn't have freedom, and soon she would realize that she didn't even have herself anymore. The first weeks of her marriage felt like a blur of public appearances, charity galas, and dinner parties. But when the cameras were off and the grand events ended, the reality of her situation became clear. Chief Olamide had no interest in her as a person. He only saw her as a trophy, an accessory to his wealth and status. There were no conversations, no genuine connections, just his cold indifference and her growing sense of isolation. Ngozi soon realized she was no longer a person in her own right. She was simply his possession, a woman with no voice, no choice, and no way out. The months passed, each day blending into the next. Ngozi's life had become a series of well-rehearsed motions, attending glamorous events, posing for photographers, and living in a golden cage. On the outside, she appeared to have it all. The mansion in one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods, the designer clothes, the fine jewelry, the private jets. But inside, she was dying. The dreams she once held dear, the ambition that had fueled her through countless days of hardship, now seemed like a distant memory. Her marriage to Chief Olamide had become a slow suffocation. Every day he was a little more distant, a little more cold, and her frustration grew. There were no late-night talks, no romantic gestures, just the sterile formality of being his wife. She had become a figurehead, his status symbol, his trophy. But what had hurt her the most was the complete lack of respect. Olamide didn't see her as a person. He didn't ask about her day, her thoughts, her needs. To him, she was just something to be owned, like an item of decoration placed in his mansion, to be admired but never truly appreciated. Ngozi often found herself standing by the window in their penthouse suite, staring out at the sprawling city of Lagos. The bright lights twinkling in the distance. It was the only time she felt a sliver of peace, the only time she could imagine herself free. One evening, as the city's noise drifted up from below, Ngozi made a decision. She had endured enough. She would no longer be his prisoner. But how could she break free from a man who owned everything? The mansion, the car, the clothes, it was all his. And worse, her family was now deeply entangled in his world. Her parents relied on his generosity for their survival, and her siblings were already benefiting from his wealth. Ngozi knew that leaving Olamide wouldn't just be about walking away from a marriage, it would be about betraying her family, about severing the ties that had once kept them together. But the more she thought about it, the more the idea of a life without freedom felt like an unbearable weight. She was not just surviving anymore. She was suffocating. As the weeks went by, the tension between them only grew. Ngozi started to notice the little signs of her own rebellion. She would show up late to events, wearing the clothes she chose, not what Olamide dictated. She would start small conversations with the house staff, asking them about their lives, listening to their stories. It was a small act of defiance, but it made her feel human again, like she still had a voice. One night, Chief Olamide came home late from a business trip, his mood sour. He didn't greet her as usual. He didn't even look at her as he walked past her in the living room. He was irritated, his mind preoccupied with some deal he was working on. But Ngozi had had enough. For the first time in months, she stood her ground. "Do you ever think about me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've become a part of your life, but you don't seem to care about what I feel or what I need." Olamide froze in his tracks, his face hardening. He had always been in control, always the one who dictated the terms. But Ngozi's words caught him off guard. He turned to face her, his eyes narrowing in irritation. "What do you mean by that?" His voice was sharp, demanding. "You never ask me how I feel," she continued, her words growing stronger. "You treat me like a possession. You don't even care enough to listen to me, to hear my voice. Do you even know who I am, beyond the woman you married?" Olamide looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. But for the first time in their marriage, he was not the one in control. Ngozi had taken the reins of her own voice. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Then finally, he spoke. "You knew what this marriage was about when you agreed to it." His words were cold, devoid of any warmth, but the hurt in Ngozi's eyes didn't escape him. For the first time, he wondered if he had taken her for granted, if he had underestimated the woman he had married. But even in that moment, he didn't know how to respond. Ngozi turned away, no longer able to hold the weight of the conversation. The house felt even more empty now, and the silence between them was unbearable. She walked out of the room and into the balcony, standing against the railing, staring out into the vast city below. Her mind raced. Was this all she was meant to be? A trophy wife, a symbol of his success? Was there no way out of this life? It was then that she heard a sound, soft, almost like a whisper. She turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. It was Amara, the housekeeper who had worked for Olamide for years. Amara had become a close friend to Ngozi over time, someone she could talk to without fear of judgment. Amara smiled at her gently. "You know, you don't have to live like this, Ngozi." The words hit Ngozi like a wave. "What do you mean?" she asked, a mix of confusion and hope rising in her chest. Amara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I've seen it in your eyes. You want more than this. You've been pretending to be happy for too long. You've been playing the part, but you're not a puppet. You're a woman with your own strength, your own dreams." Tears welled up in Ngozi's eyes. She had always been taught to be strong, to endure, to sacrifice for the sake of her family. But in that moment, she realized something she had been denying for far too long. She was allowed to live for herself. Amara's words had planted a seed in her heart, one that would begin to grow in the coming days. For the first time in months, Ngozi felt a spark of something. Hope. Maybe she wasn't trapped forever. Maybe there was a way out. Ngozi's decision was made. She couldn't continue living in this gilded cage any longer. The life of luxury, the wealth, the status, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was her own freedom, her own sense of self, her own future. She had spent so many months pretending, conforming to the life that Chief Olamide had built for her. But now, she realized that she had been living for everyone but herself. The first step was to make plans. She had to be careful, strategic. Chief Olamide was not someone who could be easily outwitted. He had eyes everywhere, and Ngozi knew that leaving him wouldn't just be a matter of walking out the door, it would be a battle. She started by quietly reaching out to a lawyer, someone who would be able to guide her through the legalities of divorce. Ngozi knew that leaving Olamide wouldn't be simple. There would be the matter of his wealth, their assets, and the financial arrangements that would be required. But more than that, there was the issue of how Olamide would react. He wouldn't take kindly to being abandoned. But for the first time in a long while, Ngozi didn't care. Amara, who had been her confidant through this entire ordeal, was the one who gave her the final push. You have the strength in you, Ngozi. You just have to take the first step. I'll help you. You don't have to do this alone. With Amara's support, Ngozi began gathering her things. She started to pack a bag of clothes, documents, and the essentials she would need. As she carefully folded her clothes, each piece felt like it was part of her old life, part of the person she was leaving behind. The life of the obedient wife, the glamorous figure who had to smile for the cameras and attend extravagant events, it was all going to be gone. The night before she planned to leave, Ngozi found herself sitting on the floor of her penthouse, gazing out at the vast city below. The skyline was a beautiful sight, but it felt like a trap. Everything that had once been dazzling now seemed suffocating. It was the perfect metaphor for her life with Olamide. At that moment, she realized that the city, with all its lights and noise, represented everything she had been running from. And now she was ready to run toward something else. The next morning, Ngozi made her move. Chief Olamide was away on business, and she knew this was her chance. She slipped out of their penthouse quietly, without drawing attention. Amara had arranged for a car to pick her up and take her to the lawyer's office. She didn't look back. As the car sped through the city, Ngozi felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Every mile that took her further from the mansion, further from Chief Olamide's cold grip, felt like a victory. She was finally free, but there was also a heavy weight in her chest. The reality of what she was doing hit her. She was walking away from the only life she had ever known, from the man she had once believed would give her everything. At the lawyer's office, Ngozi met with Mr. Okoji, a seasoned attorney who specialized in divorce cases for high-net-worth individuals. He was calm, professional, and reassuring. "We'll get you what you're entitled to, Ngozi," Mr. Okoji said as they went over the details. "But most importantly, we'll make sure you can move forward without looking over your shoulder." Ngozi felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in a long time, someone was fighting for her, not her marriage or her family's financial interests. Her. This was her moment. By the time she left the office, Ngozi had filed for divorce and had already made arrangements to start a new life. But she knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Chief Olamide would not take kindly to her departure. He was a proud man, and this would be a blow to his ego, something he wouldn't accept easily. That evening, when she returned to her apartment, Ngozi received a call from Chief Olamide. His voice, usually calm and controlled, was now laced with anger. "What do you think you're doing, Ngozi?" His voice was low, threatening. You think you can just walk away from this marriage? From me? Her hand shook as she held the phone to her ear. She had been waiting for this moment. But now that it had come, she felt the weight of it in her chest. I'm leaving, Olamide, she said firmly. I can't do this anymore. I won't be your possession, your trophy. I want my life back. There was silence on the other end of the line. She could hear him breathing heavily, the anger building in his chest. You will regret this decision, Ngozi. His voice was menacing now, almost a threat, but Ngozi didn't back down. Maybe, but I can't live my life in fear anymore. With that, she hung up the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had stood up for herself. She wasn't going to allow herself to be manipulated anymore. The next few days were tense, filled with legal meetings and preparations for what would come next. But Ngozi had never felt stronger. She wasn't the scared girl who had been forced into this marriage. She was a woman reclaiming her own destiny. But even with her newfound strength, she knew that Olamide's wrath would not be easy to avoid. He would do everything in his power to keep her from leaving him, and his power was vast. She had seen how easily he controlled people, manipulated them for his own gain. But she also knew that she had a power he could never take from her. The power to choose her own path,